His Eminence Archbishop Wilfredo truly believes in the power of women in the church.
I believe our faith can strengthen us to become the types of leaders our society needs.
I reject the glass ceiling. Christ was not about glass ceilings. There's no room to tolerate exclusion. There's no room to tolerate less than.
When we talk about the ideal of the perfect woman, I know we all realize it's that Panagia is the perfect woman.
Challenging? Absolutely. I find nothing more challenging in roles of leadership than persevering with my faith. But with that perseverance comes this ultimate beauty.
Embrace one another, uphold one another, and love one another. And what seems to be insurmountable is not.
Good afternoon and welcome to today's panel discussion on faith and leadership, a woman's perspective. This panel discussion is organized with the blessing of His Eminence Archbishop Wilfredo of America, with the support of the Department of Inter-Orthodox, Ecumenical and Interfaith Relations of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America and the Orthodox Christian Network. I'm Ourania Markaki, Program Coordinator of the Ecumenical Department, and I'm joined by Noelle Wright, Program Manager at OCN. We are very grateful to you all for plugging in as we celebrate International Women's Day on March 8th. We are honored to have an esteemed group of panelists with us today, representing a diverse range of perspectives and expertise, but united by their common faith and commitment to the life of the Orthodox Church. Our conversation intends to celebrate the limitless potential of Orthodox women and their inspirational leadership skills by showcasing Greek Orthodox women and their multifaceted stewardship. We are creating space to explore the power of Orthodox women's voices, the strength of their convictions, and the resilience of their spirit. The goal of this panel discussion is to pinpoint how Orthodox women in leadership positions are inspired by their faith to address the challenges they face in the workplace and society at large, as well as in the church. During the panel discussion, we will talk about how faith inspires them in different sections of their lives, challenges them, and/or pivots their ideas. We will focus on how it has allowed them to achieve greater goals and grow their mindsets, whilst taking faith as their moral compass. We will try to unpack what it means to be a woman within the Orthodox Church and explore the spaces where women are also called to church leadership. As we stand on the threshold of a new era, it is imperative that we not only honor the past, but also envision a future where women's leadership continues to flourish in every facet of Orthodox life. We are here today to ignite that vision, to spark conversations from inspirational women, to influence the younger generation, to empower each other and embrace leadership in all its forms, within our families, our professional lives, our communities, and our churches. Let us approach this discussion with open hearts and minds, guided by the Holy Spirit, with respect and mutual understanding. Our hope is that today's conversation will not only shed light on women's leadership in the church, but also inspire meaningful dialogue and reflection within our own communities. Without further ado, and with a deep sense of gratitude for your time, I would like to introduce our esteemed panelists and invite them to share their thoughts and perspectives. Mrs. Elaine Allen is the Treasurer and Senior Advisor to His Eminence Archbishop Wilfredo of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America and serves on the Executive Committee of the Archdiocesan Council. In her capacity as volunteer treasurer, she is responsible for the finances and the business operations of the Archdiocese and advises on finances of many of the affiliated institutions of the Archdiocese and its ministries. Elaine was appointed as treasurer in 2018 and prior to that established as the audit member of the Archdiocesan Council in 2017 and was its first chair. She served on the Archdiocesan District's Financial Committee for many years. Furthermore, she is a member of Leadership 100 and the Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew Foundation. Mrs. Elaine Allen is a retired partner of Ernst & Young and an affiliated firm, Mitchell & Titus, where she was responsible for the firm's not-for-profit organizations practices spanning 30 years. She's a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania Wharton School with a degree in accounting and finance and is a certified public accountant. Mrs. Allen and her family have been stewards of the Church for Our Savior in Rye, New York, under the spiritual guidance of Father Elias Vilis for many years. Mrs. Debbie George is the National Philoptochos Executive Board Member and Metropolis of Detroit Philoptochos President. She is deeply rooted in her community in Falcon Hills in Michigan as a dedicated member of Holy Cross Greek Orthodox Church. Her commitment to serve spans generations, as she follows in the footsteps of her grandmother, mother, and sister as a third-generation member of Philoptochos. With a background in business and art history, Mrs. George earned her bachelor's from Lewis and Clark College in Portland, Oregon, and further honored her skills with a certificate in fashion design from Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising in San Francisco. Her professional journey includes roles at Merrill Lynch Capital Markets and Wells Fargo Bank, as well as a stint as a substitute elementary school teacher while raising her two daughters. Dr. Elizabeth Perdomo is a professor in the International Studies program at Boston College. Dr. Perdomo served as a diplomat in the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom and member of the U.S. Secretary of State's Religion and Foreign Policy Working Group, and advises international organizations on geopolitics, religion, and human rights. She's an internationally recognized expert on global Orthodox Christianity. Her recent publications include Diplomacy, Geopolitics, and Global Orthodox Christianity, and Influence Operations Increases Religious Ecosystem in Calling Club Book 3. She's also co-edited 2 volumes, Eastern Orthodox Christianity and American Higher Education, Theological, Historical, and Contemporary Reflections, and Thinking Through Faith, Perspectives from Orthodox Christian Scholars, and is widely published in academic and policy journals. Her policy and practitioner work includes appointments to the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center, Religions for Peace, Senfib Center for the Deaconess, the Freedom of Religion or Belief Women's Alliance, and to the Ecumenical Patriarchate Task Force on Modern Slavery. She was a delegate of the Ecumenical Patriarchate to the Holy and Great Council at Crete in 2016. She's married to Dr. Alexandros Kiru, and they are happy parents to their daughter, Sophia. Dr. Pedromo, lastly but not least, holds a PhD in political science from MIT. Mrs. Kira Liperakis is the co-founder and chief operating officer for Orthodox Volunteer Corps. She previously served as director of the Crossroads Summer Institute at Hellenic College Holy Cross. She received her bachelor's degree from Villanova University and her master's of theological studies from Boston College School of Theology and Ministry, where she focused her studies on youth and young adult ministry and the ministry of women in the church. In addition to working in full-time ministry for the past 10 years, Kira has published articles on the topic of young women's faith formation. Kira and her husband and their son attend St. Mary Orthodox Church in Cambridge, Mass. Presbytera Christi is a practicing CPA CFO and has served philanthropically in leadership roles at the metropolis and archdiocesan levels for the past 35 years. In 1995, Presbytera Mary and Father Paul moved to Memphis, Tennessee to serve the Annunciation Greek Orthodox Church community. Presbytera Mary continued her work as a CPA consultant for the law firm of Baker, Donaldson, Beeman, and Caldwell while immersing herself in child advocacy issues in the Memphis area community. At the age of 32, after serving as treasurer of Les Passes Children's Services, she was asked to serve at the executive board of Le Bonheur Children's Medical Center, promoting patient leadership, family-centered care, and child advocacy. During her 8-year tenure on the executive board, she served as chair of the Quality Committee, Child Advocacy Committee, and Public Policy Committee as vice chair of the executive board, until her decision to accept the chief financial officer position at the Methodist Le Bonheur Hospital Affiliated Services Division, during which time she led strategic planning initiatives for all outpatient care services. She was also an adjunct professor in the Masters of Healthcare Administration program at the University of Memphis, and her case on Methodist healthcare strategy was published in 2004. Over the years, Presbytera Mary has received numerous designations and awards for her service to the Memphis community, most notably as one of the top 50 women in Memphis and her family's inaugural Family of the Year designation from Le Bonheur Children's Hospital. Furthermore, she's a chief financial officer and president of the National Sisterhood of Presbyteras. She has been married to Reverend Father Paul Christie for 34 years and has 3 children and a granddaughter. Dr. Anna Gelurakis has recently been elected to the board of directors of the American Hellenic Council. Prior to this appointment, Dr. Gelurakis served as president of the San Sofia Cathedral Parish Council in Los Angeles for 4 years. As president, her work primarily involved leading and executing the business operations of San Sofia Cathedral and Havington Center. During this tenure, Dr. Gelurakis worked very closely with the deans of the cathedral, Father John Bacchus and Father Gary Kyriakou. Her work continued to bridge the Greek Orthodox community at large by cultivating strong relationships with the LA Greek Consulate, the Niarchos Foundation at UCLA, and the Los Angeles Greek Film Festival leaders. Dr. Gelurakis also maintains an associate board position at the Greek Orthodox Metropolis of San Francisco. Preceding her work in the Greek Orthodox community, Dr. Gelurakis was the CEO of Philly Inc., a nonprofit organization that supports the safety, healing, and education of young girls and boys rescued from human trafficking at the Theotokos Girls and Boys Orphanage in Kolkata, India. Graduated from Case Western Reserve University School of Dentistry, Dr. Gelurakis held a general dentistry practice for 10 years. She currently is the director of the Surgical Specialty Division at Holston Medical Group, leading all business, operational, and surgical systems for physician and staff. To begin with the discussion today, I would like to present our first question on faith and leadership. So we're going to discuss about how do you see the role of faith via your own experiences of leadership roles in your life? Is it liberating or challenging you? I would like the panel to start with Mrs. Allen and her viewpoint on this question.
Thank you, Ourania. I love your name. That's my Yaya's name. So it's always beautiful to hear it. To lead for me is really about two things, confidence and humility. Certainly, as Orthodox Christians, we're taught from a very young age the virtue of humility and to value others above oneself. But as you progress in life, and certainly through your personal experiences as well as your work experiences, you come to learn, at least for me, that leadership is also about two things. One, inspiring others, but secondarily, encouraging others to walk with you, to join your team, to be part of what's necessary in order to truly achieve objectives, because no one of us can do it alone. And I found that during challenging times, whether it's a personal experience, the business world, certainly coming into our Holy Archdiocese during a particularly challenging financial time, that it was this balance of confidence and humility, and that inspired me, and really always my faith in God and our Lord to show me the right way. When you're in the financial world, it's very easy for your moral ethics to be challenged. There are many opportunities to not do the right thing. And I always think about, what would Christ have done if he were in this circumstance? And that's what guides me to make the decisions and to influence others as to how to get through what can be sometimes some very murky paths. So I've always found that I've been liberated by my Greek Orthodox faith in all that I've done.
Thank you so much for your response, and that was really beautiful. Presbytera Mary, could you please go next?
Sure. Thank you, Ourania. So this was a very interesting question to me because it involved the or, inspiring or challenging. And as I shared with this panel, I found it to be and. So when I started my career, I felt that it was challenging to lead with the example of my faith because I was in a secular environment. With my work with Pete Marwick, it was different 35, 37 years ago. You know, you were in a different time. And so when you're asking me to inspire young leaders, young and upcoming leaders, which include, of course, my daughters, and will include my granddaughter, know that it was challenging. And in that evolution of my faith and through my marriage to Father Paul Christie, I found my direction in a different area, a different capacity, and I found it to be very mission driven. So I chose roles beyond the typical path for a CPA, which is at that time the Big Eight, having graduated from the same university that Anna did at Case Western. I went that route, and then I chose to go to healthcare. And I chose that specifically because I felt a strong mission. So even with my career, the way that my model was, I can make an impact through donations, through bottom line, so adjusting that revenue, adjusting those expenses so that then we could care for more people. So to me, that's what became the inspiration. So it's answering that challenge with inspiration and through leadership. And I found that to be very liberating and to be a good example to young leaders, young women leaders, not only in my parish, but also in the greater community. And of course, that career took off in Memphis. And I am always grateful for that. And the Panagia for me is everything. So for me, as a mother, as a career woman, I look to her for guidance and, of course, to be a good witness and to honor the legacy of my parents and my grandparents and my presbytera who raised me through a career. So again, both to me, inspiring and challenging.
Perfect. Thank you so much for this honest response. So insightful, honestly. Going next, I would like to ask for Dr. Pradamu.
Thank you. Thank you, Ourania, for convening us for this conversation. It's a pleasure to be with everyone here today on the celebration of International Women's Day. In terms of my faith and whether it's in leadership and whether the faith has been challenging or liberating, I've just always understood faith as a responsibility to try to lead, and by example, by inclusion, by participation, with energy, with humility, and with courage. And all in every space in which I've had leadership roles, whether it's family, church, professional life, and the public sphere and parish life, the one thing that always guides me is my faith, and seeing the image of Christ in others. I always try to keep that in mind in working in leadership roles, to see that everyone is created in the image of Christ. And so leadership has really been about that faith commitment and that faith reminder. And for me, it has served me well in being a collaborator and being a leader and trying to be as fearless as I possibly can in the way that I lead, and bringing others with me and learning from them. And traveling around the world in diplomatic service, I saw from the most high profile people, women, and from those who were not known on the international stage, that women are leading all the time. And it's very, very often their faith that drives the way they lead and the impact of their leadership. So I keep that in mind at all times. And I pray to leaders who can inspire me. And two of my favorites are John the Baptist, a wonderful disruptor, and the Empress Theodora, who convened an ecumenical council, the one that reinstated the veneration of icons. So I look for inspiration to my faith to be a good leader.
Could we please have Mrs. George experience as well next?
Ourania, thank you so much for inviting me to be on this panel, and fellow panelists. I'm honored to be here, and I've enjoyed listening to you and getting inspiration from all of you. As far as the question, I find it both liberating and challenging. And I'll tell you what, and like Presbytera Mary, it is an and, but it depends on which group I'm leading. And my current leadership role as Metropolis President of Philoptos in the Metropolis of Detroit and being on the national board, I am with women that I'm leading. We all have the same faith. If I were in the secular world, when I led children and students in a classroom, or leading a docent tour, or leading my swim club, it was a little bit awkward. It was definitely more challenging, but it's liberating when we all have the same faith and it's a common thread that we all share. All I can say is think about it. We start a meeting with a prayer and we end with a prayer. You would never be able to do that in the secular world, in a school setting, in a docent tour, in a swim club. And I know that we, as Philipos members and as my own desire, we follow what Christ taught, to love one another as themselves, and to love your Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. And I think that's what leads us as Philipos women, as women in general in our church. And I'm honored to do that. I've observed, one thing I've personally observed and lived out is that when we as leaders openly share our faith with others, we build stronger connections because we have that connection with one another. And it builds greater trust and a sense of community and commitment. And I think we're all committed toward the same ideal, whereas you'd be challenged if you were in the secular world. And so I find it, in short, I find it liberating to be with women who have the same belief that I do. And it is almost easier to lead because I'm leading with a Christ-like mentality, and I am being assisted by the Panelist and Christ and the Holy Spirit. And I feel like, why couldn't I do it? Why couldn't I lead? Whereas someone else might say, oh, I could never do that. I'm like, yeah, we can, because I'm not doing it myself. I'm being assisted. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this. Could we please have the insights of Dr. Yolrakis next?
Hi, Ourania. Thank you so much for this incredible invitation. And it's a dear honor to be on a panel with such incredible leaders and women of the Orthodox faith and in our community at large. So truly an honor. In answering the question, I believe leadership, I believe faith is everything. It's guidance, it's direction, it's discernment, comfort, and ultimately where I get my strength. Challenging? Absolutely. I find nothing more challenging in roles of leadership than persisting through and persevering with my faith. But with that perseverance comes this ultimate beauty, a growth factor, a healing, and an ultimate sense of inner freedom. There's a process of getting to that inner freedom, and that starts with my dialogue. My dialogue to the Holy Mother, almost always, to a special saint. For me, it's Saint Nectarios and Saint Joseph the Hesychist, and to Christ himself. My dialogue can begin as a reflection, thankfulness in a time of joy, a reevaluation, or simply venting in those moments of deep challenge. But what comes out of it is a discernment, a direction, or simply in the moment, nothing more than a sense of peace. Sometimes there is no answer, but the peace and freeing sense is all I may need in that moment. Ultimately, the answers do come and direction is always provided.
Perfect. Thank you so much for this contribution, Dr. Yolrakis. Could we have Mrs. Liberakis?
Thank you, Ourania. It is so wonderful to be here again, as everyone has said, with an incredible group of leaders and women in our church. So if I were to boil down to how the faith influences my experience of leadership, it's that I believe I'm called to a different standard of leadership because of our faith. Christ is our ultimate example of leadership, and he completely altered the way we normally think about a leader. Even back then, when he came, there was this expectation it would be this grand Messiah coming blazing in. And yet our Lord took on human flesh in all its forms as a baby. And, I have a son who's, almost 2 years old. So close to those newborn stages, it's remarkable to me to think about Christ as an infant. And he humbled himself. He took on our pain and our suffering. He was crucified. It was a shift from this expected kind of top-down dominating leader to one who washed the feet of his disciples, embraced those on the margins, who had a community of disciples. So for me, Christ's life and ministry changes everything for the way that I lead, or I seek to lead. And for that reason, You could say it, and I really appreciate, what Presbytera Mary said. It's both liberating and challenging. It's liberating for me in the sense that this model of leadership, Christ's servant leadership, I believe at its best when we really make ourselves open to that, can offer a healing presence to a world that is in so much pain. Like, we need more leaders who lead with the heart of Christ. And it's challenging because as Christian leaders, right, or Christians in roles of leadership, whether in the church formally or out of the church in a secular capacity, as I said, I believe we're held to a higher standard. So when our leaders do fail, or when we fail, which it happens, right? It hurts even more, right? It feels disappointing, both in those moments for myself and then in other experiences of leadership. I'm grateful that in our faith, we know we live in a fallen world. We are human. So we are bound to struggle and have these challenges and miss the mark. And so Christ meeting us in those moments, right, and liberating us out of them is something that is really important for me. So I would say, yes, it's both liberating and challenging, and challenging to do the right thing and to not do it alone. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that can happen in leadership, is thinking that I can do everything by myself, and Christ completely disrupts that understanding of leadership. So I'm so grateful to my faith for shaping that for me.
It's really important to recognize that there's always a liberating and a challenging part in our lives, and how we are able to get inspired by both of them and then move on. And thank you for your honesty and your personal experience. Moving on to the next question, we would love to know, how does faith inform your life as a woman in all of your sections? So in the personal, professional, and spiritual parts of your life, being a mother, being a daughter, being a grandmother, being at a glass ceiling, or as a faithful in your church. So I would like this conversation to be started with Presbytera Mary Christie.
Thank you so much. So I've thought about the answer to this question, and it really does start in our youth. And so our faith is formed through our interactions with those whom we love, and at our church, basically. We're at home and we're at our church. And that's how my life started. So faithful to the church, regularly attended in all the programs. And the development of that faith, this was paramount for me, was the relationship that my parents showed towards their priest and presbytera, the respect, and also the relationship that I had with my priest and presbytera, which was extremely important to me. So on the one hand, I had my parents and my siblings helping to guide me. And then I had my priest and my presbytera also to support me and to guide me when I needed it. So through college, we never left the church. And again, when we began our professional careers. So as a daughter, and then now a wife and mother and a grandmother, I'm instilling those values in my children and have done so. And I see that connection. I see that they also are following that model. So that's as the first prong in my personal life. In my professional life, again, as I shared before, it started out, the typical path. I remember being interviewed in my high school magazine. I was one of, top of my class, and they said, well, what do you want to be? And I said, well, I want to be a CPA. And, oh, what do you want to do? I want to work for the top firm. So here I was in my lack of humility saying what I wanted to do. And I shared that earlier, that, success to me at the time was different than what I define as success now. Success to me was meeting those milestones. However, if we do not have humility, and if we do not know that those gifts are coming from our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, then we are not doing what we're supposed to be doing, and how we're supposed to be doing, and how we're to think about doing it. And that's what I appreciate so much about Crossroads. Because when I our children to Crossroads, they learned it's about the why as well. So for me, I had to develop that in my career and realize that always know the why, Mary. You know, your faith is strong, but you need to really take that into consideration. And I think for the 35 years that I've served in philanthropic roles, and that's from the entire spectrum, and never was it anything I was seeking out. It was in my spiritual life. How can I be a witness to others? And when asked, I was always taught, you don't say no. So here I was, and I have accepted all of these different roles. And what I have felt the most appreciative of is that my voice has been respected and I have been heard. And to me, for those of you listening, that is the most important part of this panel, is that should we be engaged to lead, we do it with humility. We do it, as Elaine said, with competence, and confidence, but we also do it knowing that we are representing women. And that is an honor to be asked to represent women. So that's what I would do, is seek out the leadership roles. When asked, you say yes, and you inspire others. And that includes women, that includes men who have daughters, that includes everybody, because you're a very strong voice, and don't forget that.
Thank you so much for this inspiration. Mrs. Limberakis.
Sure. So, I mean, the question that you ask is like, how does faith inform my identity as a woman? And I think for a long time, I struggled to figure what that meant for me to be a woman in the church. And it was something that I had heard for many years from the young women who I had worked with, both through my Metropolis camp, at Crossroad, at OCF Real Break trips, and now with Orthodox Volunteer Corps. I've been doing youth ministry for many years in the church. And some of these young women, who I was very connected to, were thriving in their academic, social, and personal lives, did not see themselves thriving in the church. I think it became clear to me that, while it's evident that there are parishes where women play a really critical role in a critical lay role in parish life, from parish council and pre-lobsicus, as we see here on this panel, teaching Sunday school, there was generally remained a lack of education and explicit discussion around women's roles in the church that left the women who I had spoken with kind of questioning their place and feeling like passive observers in the liturgical life. And that kind of passive observing, that status quo, went against what I understood the essence of the liturgy to truly be, right? The work of all the people towards Christ's mission here on earth, which includes men and women. So those questions, that their stories that really pierced me, led me to explore examples from within our tradition that would offer a sense of purpose and belonging and a sense of hope for what could be for us as women in the church. So the church then informed everything for me about what does it mean to be a woman? What does it mean to be a woman in leadership? So, I would share with them and then learn myself the lives of female saints like Saint Photini, who was the first person to whom Christ revealed himself as the Messiah, and Mary Magdalene, who we call equal to the apostles, to Saint Phoebe the Deaconess, a disciple of Paul. I would share and learn about modern examples of women, some of whom were on this panel, right? And some women who are serving as pastoral assistants as at parishes, chaplains at hospitals, iconographers, professors of theology at universities and seminaries. I would share about, organizations like the St. Phoebe Center for the Deaconess, who does tremendous work to educate for the revival of the ordained deaconess. And I wanted them to know that women have had and continue to have a significant role in building up the kingdom. We as humans, just have to make sure that we are living up to our theology that reflects that inherent dignity of women and their essential place in the body of Christ. So through my own personal navigating of my role as a woman working for the church, that was the path that I sought. And just as a woman who is a child of God, ministering to other women along the way, I've come to find immense strength from our Orthodox faith and what it means to be a woman. I don't, it's hard for me to divide my, experience and work from my professional life because it's all blended, right? Working for a ministry of the church. And as I've described, there are a myriad of examples in the clouds of saints and women today who remind me that there isn't one specific way to be an Orthodox woman, which I think at times I felt that pressure, right? To maybe fit a particular mold. But realizing through the saints, through modern day examples that, there isn't one way to be an Orthodox mother, an Orthodox professional, an Orthodox working mother, an Orthodox wife, an Orthodox daughter, right? We are united as sisters in Christ in our ultimate purpose of loving God and neighbor. As someone spoke earlier about the greatest commandment, like we have that shared calling, and yet the way we do that can look different, and that's okay. And that's something that has been really helpful for me in kind of navigating my identity, which was the original question, and working with other women to explore, what does it mean to be, a woman of faith in the church?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Yalorakis.
In identifying my role as a mother, a professional, or a service to a not-for-profit or to the church, I first identify my sense of self, and secondly, the responsibility required in administering each one of those roles. In evaluating my sense of self, I look inwardly to my strengths, my weaknesses, my abilities, and my values. And it is here in evaluating my values that direct my decision-making. And for me, my ultimate core value is loving thy neighbor as thyself. And it is with this principle how I've governed every role that I've led. I think in all our roles as mothers, this role requires nurturing, love, patience, more love, and more of everything every step of the way. There's no perfect day, and there's no perfect way to give. I firmly believe the role of motherhood is the most awesome gift that one can be given. The one thing I've always looked at is this beautiful gift of life that was bestowed upon me, and realizing it is my responsibility to raise and nurture this life into adulthood. The how-to actually is the challenge. In my humble opinion, this is where my prayer dialogue deepened and has become ever essential. I have found no other way to be guided and led to moment over the years. In my professional career, I can't say that I've ever looked at a glass ceiling. I started my dental career in assessing my strengths, my abilities, and moved towards achieving all those goals. During my dental school years and early career days, I can say I never felt an inequality, and actually the opposite. I felt supported in every career path and goals that I wanted to achieve. But where the conflict arose is having to choose between those core traditional values and continuing a more mainstream career path. And for me, looking over the years, I don't regret ever making the traditional choice. I can say without a doubt, God has always worked it out. And one of those key triggers and one of those key points for me was when I had to look at retiring my dental license and which path I was going to choose. And I think as a woman, sometimes I will speak from my perspective, is identifying with that career choice. And I believe that when we let that go and open to who we are, what we're meant to do, what our gifts and talents are, and how collectively that can be embraced, then the doors go flying open. And that is exactly what took place after I but I had to play a mind game that I'm taking a sabbatical for a long period of time, and I can always go back to clinical practice. But the doors literally flew open, and every gift, every talent, everything God uses for his glory ultimately, and for humanity. And that's when the door open to start my own not-for-profit. When the India documentary came, literally fell into my lap. And then furthering on with the Feely organization and then St. Sophia, I can say not one moment have I ever regretted having built up all this experience and then being able to use it for the good of humanity and the continuation of loving thy neighbor in the world.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Could we have Dr. Pradramu?
Thank you again, Ourania, and thank you to all of you for what you're saying and the inspirational words and experiences that you're sharing. In terms of your question to us, Ourania, in terms of the relationship between faith and our identity as a woman, I mean, I can say that my faith is really at the center of who I am and how I am as a woman and as a person. And I think of myself as a person who happens to be a woman. And I always go back to the wellspring of our faith or my faith to think about what that means. In the professional space, I think that becoming a professional and the different sort of pathways of my professional life has always been driven by my faith and being a woman of faith. I had a short, happy career in international banking. I've worked in diplomacy. I am an academic. And in all of those spaces, those professional spaces, I have taken my faith as an inspiration to be free and to become more close to God. I mean, we're all born in the image of Christ, but whether we are Christ-like depends on our behavior to other human beings, to our fellow coworkers, and certainly to our families. And so that piece of my faith has always driven the way I have tried to live my professional life. And honestly, although working in very secular, very male-dominated professional spaces, I have felt that my call to be the best version of myself that I could, to be the best Orthodox Christian I could as a woman, that has stood me well in terms of how I have moved in my professional life. And I've also been very mindful of the fact that as an Orthodox Christian and as a woman, an Orthodox woman, there is no room for lukewarm in how I live my life. I mean, we have to strive for excellence. And I have translated excellence not into how many promotions, not into financial success, but in terms of how faithful I have been to trying to be that image of Christ that's in all of us. And I could say that in terms of my personal life, there would be no professional life without my personal life. I echo what everyone else has said. I would not be without my husband, Dr. Alexandros Kiru. He's also an academic, and our daughter, Sophia. I've mentioned this before, and others have echoed it here. For me, motherhood is the greatest miracle and gift of a lifetime. And when you're a mother, when I was a new mother looking at the face of our infant daughter, I thought, okay, this is a blank slate, tabula rasa, and she's looking at me. And I want to make sure that when she looks at me, and then when she watches me, she sees the best that I can possibly offer, because there aren't any do-overs. And so I've always been cognizant of that, and that's connected me to this idea of image and likeness. So for me, family and faith are the wellspring of who I am professionally. And when it comes to glass ceilings, they're there. And I think the thing about glass ceilings, the proverbial glass ceilings, is glass is really difficult because it's very, very strong, and it's sometimes very dangerous to break. And glass is also a problem because it's invisible, but it's present. And so, I reject the glass ceiling. Christ was not about glass ceilings. And so we have to, move beyond and break through glass ceilings. There's no room to tolerate exclusion. There's no room to tolerate less than. That's not a part of, at least for me, that's not a part of how I think about our faith. And we cannot be about barriers, whether visible and invisible in our professional lives, and certainly not in our family, and certainly not in our church space. So those glass ceilings are there. We have to like feel for them sometimes because maybe we don't see them, but when we see them, we have to find the best way to break through them, and in a way that we break through them that doesn't cause harm or damage, but that brings growth to everybody. And I always go back to my faith, back to my family, and then the rest will come professionally.
That was an amazing response. And honestly, it's so nice to hear from you that family also inspires you in this generation to become better in your professional life rather than holds you back. Thank you. Thank you so much. Could we have Mrs. George next?
I love listening to everybody's fervent beliefs and deep thoughts. It's just like, it's incredible. I'm just like in awe. So thank you very much, everyone. I just want to say that truly faith is just part of my very being, whether it's as a mother, a daughter, a granddaughter, a wife, a friend, a churchgoer. It's who I am. And I don't think that my friends, the non-Orthodox friends, know that faith is Debbie George, you know, there she is. She's got faith. And I just marvel that they don't sometimes. And that just surprises me. But faith is who I am. And it sets me apart from the unfaithful, as we know. And I wouldn't want to be anywhere without that. And it gives me purpose so that I can do his, with a capital H, his glory, so I can emulate his glory. I want to say that when we talk about everyone on the panel has had, as a professional, obviously, I had my profession, my work life earlier on, and then my profession was as a mother. And I'm proud of that too, but I'm here as a volunteer in the organization to help the church go forward. And Kira was talking about the youth. I would say that myself personally, as much as we went to church all the time, my youth, they didn't have as many options for camps, groups. So because of my strong family faith, we forged forward anyway, and I've continued with the faith. But some of those programs that they had for youth early on, I wasn't able to participate in, or they just didn't have them. For me, is in my world, what I was thinking of. When we talk about the ideal of the perfect woman, I know we all realize it's that Panagia is the perfect woman. And I'm not so proud to think that I can anyway, in any shape or form, be anything like her, but she is my role model, and it's who I want to emulate. And I hope that I can emulate that with my own daughters and those that I'm leading in the church. And it could even be sons, which I don't have, but young men, that we can be role models for them too. As far as the glass ceiling, I never thought, I know it's there, it's definitely there, but I never thought I couldn't do anything. My mother was a leader years ago. She was the first parish council president west of the Mississippi, female west of the Mississippi. I think we talked about this on our planning, that they didn't want her on the parish council. They didn't think, they had to ask, is it okay for a woman to be here? And I never have felt that has been a part of my world. She also said prior to that, when she got on the Philippus board, and the Philippus president, must have been VP, and the president got a job. So she felt, or her family felt, she couldn't be this volunteer. So my mother got the job by default. We have come so far from that. I know we have more to go in the church. We were never satisfied, but we have come so far. So thus, I never thought I couldn't do anything, because that was my role model, was my mother. And so I'm honored that I can do the faith, continue the faith, and be a part of the church. And as we see, there's so many women in leadership in the church. I'm going to go back to my Sunday school. Think about it. When I grew up, if I'm dating myself, every church school director was a male. I could name them at my church who they were. Now the females we're not taking over, but we have very, very strong careers, strong leadership roles, and I'm very honored. And I'm trying to continue to do that and be the best I can be. So that's my thought. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this amazing response. Could we have Mrs. Allen?
So it's really interesting to listen to all of you and to hear you all express the real power of the woman figure in our church, most notably the Panelist Theotokos. And for me, and my mother in particular, who really believed in the power of the Theotokos and instilled it in me, it's always been who I look to in times of trouble or when there's healing necessary. And I think just to be very open about it, I will just talk about a few personal stories. So I started in public accounting right out of college almost 50 years ago. It was definitely a man's world. I think I was the third woman they had ever hired in the whole New York area, working for a big public accounting firm. And I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and I was ready for my first assignment. And the staffing person came to me and said, you know, we have this large aerospace defense contractor we were thinking of assigning you to, but you know what? They've never had a woman as an auditor on the team, and perhaps that wouldn't be the right assignment. So instead, we're going to put you on this other client, a much smaller entity. You'll get your feet wet. You'll begin to understand how to do the job. And of course, I said, okay. And I went on to that engagement, and the chief financial officer was a fan of the 2 martini lunch. And you knew that if you wanted to deal with him, you needed to do so before lunch and not afterwards, because he was particularly cantankerous after lunch. And then I went on to another assignment, and it was very similar in terms of the experience working in the environment where I was a novelty. We then fast forward maybe 6 or 7 months later, and I'm working on another assignment. And this was it was a manufacturer of fire trucks that they delivered to the desert, to the Arabian desert, that were used to put out fires in the desert. It was a very complex manufacturing process, and I was working with a supervisor who said to me, you know, you're doing a great job. And I said, really? How could that be? I hadn't done so well the last 6 months. And he said, no, you're doing just fine. And so I never looked back. I moved forward with that career. I stayed with that firm for my entire career. And I chose a path that was an unorthodox one. I served not-for-profit organizations. That's not how you get promoted. That's not how you make a lot of money in these firms. But I found it to be particularly rewarding, because those organizations were doing good work. They appreciated what you were able to do for them. You were able to maintain your faith in all of the work that you did. And it turned out to be a very, very rewarding career. Now let's talk a few moments about my personal life as well, again, where faith in the Theotokos became so important. So I was very blessed to have twins. And everyone would talk about how wonderful it is to have twins, and it's all done at once, et cetera, et cetera. And maybe 2 years into it, my son was diagnosed with a disability. And we were fortunate to have good health care. And we had no less than 2 to 3 therapists in the house every single day. And my mother, who came to stay with us to help, because I had a busy work life, every morning prayed to the Theotokos, lit her candili, and prayed for the well-being of my children. And when I reflect on it, it's very clear to me that despite the best healthcare we could find, it was really that faith that got us through those really difficult times. And I'm very proud to say that at this point, my son has graduated. He's an engineer, and he's a subdeacon in our church. And it is his faith that is really what inspires me and the rest of our family. So you can see in those two examples just the power of belief and what that means to all of us. Let me just turn for a moment also to service to the church. So as I mentioned, I was very busy working, but I was asked to would I help out because they were looking for a volunteer with particular skill sets. Again, I happen to have spent my entire career working with not-for-profit organizations, so I knew, a thing or two about the financials of not-for-profit organizations, and I came forward, and I would say that it didn't matter whether I was a layperson, whether I was a clergyman, where I was a male or a female. The church was looking for someone that had, most importantly, the time, because time is very precious, right? And secondarily, the skill sets. And in that regard, it's always been, as I mentioned earlier, my faith that has always propelled me to continue to work in the church, despite whatever the obstacles might be. And I would say, and I think maybe Presbytera Mary, you mentioned this as well earlier on, that women speak with a different voice, both literally and figuratively. And it is that voice that brings us to a different place in our church. You've heard it expressed throughout the comments today. And that's what gives me both encouragement and a lot of pleasure in what we will see in the future, not only for us, but for our children, our grandchildren, and the generations to come.
So for the last question, I would like to ask, how does faith contribute to a better society where it can inspire other women to become future leaders? I would love your advice on the younger generation and how to inspire them. How can women see the boundaries, but also go through them and go to success? And how should they combat those obstacles in front of them? Dr. Padrano, you have a thought.
Well, I would say that we live at a time when around us we see, people's existential troubles and their hopes in front of us every day, close to us, near where we live and work, and around the world. And so I feel that faith should and must contribute to, full society and to making the world a better place, and frankly, to saving humanity from itself. I think that faith in and of itself is so important in helping to make a better world, because to be able to believe is to be able to be conscious and to be free. And that's how we're created. We're created in love in order to be free. And I think faith enables that. And I think faith communities, and that includes the Greek Orthodox Church, must always keep that in mind in serving fellow human beings. I'll go back to something very personal. My mother was the youngest of 7 children in a very traditional Greek Orthodox Greek American family. My father was an immigrant from Cyprus, where he grew up impoverished. His father died when he was 5 months old, so it was his mother who raised him and his siblings. And in both of those parents, I learned about the importance of faith in inspiring hope and in teaching that really anything is possible. My mother would always tell me, you can become anything you want. You can become whoever you want. And I learned that also in the space of the churches, which is where we spent so much of our time. And so I take that with me to the present moment. I learned it as a young girl, and I learned it from someone who was my mother, another generation. And now as a mother, one of the things that I think about every day is how it is that as church, we can be church cross-generationally, that all generations can and must be included, and certainly men and women, boys and girls, but you're asking us to speak about women and girls. So cross-generational being of church, and we have to hold each other up. That's how we make for hopefulness. We have to cherish each other. We cannot compete with each other in a kind of zero-sum game, for leadership in the church. We can't sort of fall into these sort of performative identities that pit women against each other vis-a-vis other decision makers. We are all church, and we have to be church by speaking the truth in love and being fearless. And I go back always then to Paul, with whom I've made my peace, St. Paul, and also to the forerunner, John the Baptist. And I think that if we think cross-generationally, if we know that we always have something to learn as well as to give across generations, we as women can be part of a better church and make the church as full as it can be. And that means then also recognizing that we have a responsibility to our fellow human beings. I have seen women all over the world who, by virtue of their faith commitments, they're fearless in sharing the message of hope, both by what they speak and what they do, and by sacrificing themselves for their families, for their daughters, for giving their daughters hope for a better world and for their communities. And I think that we as Orthodox Christians, at least myself as an Orthodox Christian, that it's my responsibility, both in the church and as church, to try to share a message of hope. And that means also respecting every single human being as created in the image of Christ. And it means, again, not sleeping. We always have to be alert and be awake, and we can never, ever be indifferent, because for me, indifference is a sin, and with indifference, there is no hope. But with effort, however imperfect, we can always inspire hope at a time when our world desperately needs hope. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Padramo. Could we have Dr. Yelowrakis go next?
Hi again. How does faith contribute to a better society? I believe faith contributes to a better society because when we hold on to and persevere with our specific core value, then every interaction is based on that very principle. I think it's, every interaction, whether it's at the grocery store, on the phone, or a telemarketer, or within our not-for-profits, or on the ground doing incredible work. I believe that it's every interaction in that leadership role, or just that human connection, person to person, because that's what stems from one person to the next. I think in terms of advice and so forth, what I've learned most importantly is knowing oneself, having a methodical thought process, a methodical approach to those leadership roles, and who we're leading and what example we're trying to lead by. I know that one's path isn't always straightforward, and to allow and trust the ebb and flow. I firmly believe in accepting failure, accept disappointment, and accept redirection. These we try to steer away from. We look at failure as something we didn't do right. And actually, that's where the greatest learning takes place, is in those moments, in those challenges, in those inner weaknesses. But the outcome is ever blessed. And I believe that the beauty in the Orthodox Church is that this thing we call confession, but it's that one piece that allows that healing and a clear-cut path to always come back to one's truth. I echo Dr. Prodromo. Do not fear. Fear plants many roots, and no one needs to be chasing those rabbit holes. It's ultimately it's trust in God, and that dialogue, you have it. It's there. We have it. It's private. It's personal. It's uplifting. It's everything that we have. And the most important thing, it's whoever you revere most dear. For me, again, it's my friend in Christ, of course, the Holy Panagia, the Theotokos. One of my friends the other day said, she's my 911. And I'm like, I love the way you said that. And then, of course, our special saints. I think from all the work that I have seen, and I echo all of these beautiful ladies and their work and their leadership, the one thing that I have seen is that the Holy Theotokos threads this beautiful blanket of love across humanity and embraces and loves, and that's the beauty and hope for the future. I think, as we continue to thread that in every interaction, in our core, in our values, in our work, the beauty of love bridges all bonds.
That was really beautiful. Could we have Mrs. Limbarakis go next?
Sure. So there were a lot of questions in this one. There was both, the overarching framework of faith and hope. How does faith contribute to a better society? And you also asked, like, well, what's still missing, right? What's the next step for Orthodox women, and how can they inspire and help others? So I'll come at this from kind of those two. I want to tackle both questions because they're both important. In terms of how does faith contribute to a better society, or can inspire other women to be future leaders, I believe our faith can strengthen us to become the types of leaders our society needs. Leaders of compassion and integrity, faithfulness to the communities they are leading, and grounded in our ultimate telos, right? Union with God and neighbor, that being kind of the ultimate focus. So I believe that our faith can really strengthen us to lead differently today, and to be a part of being a healing presence in a world that has so much chaos. Seek to be a healing presence, right? Now, when I think about the future and hope for what it means for, women in the church and how we can inspire to help others through their Orthodox community, I'll be honest and I'll share that I believe that I have seen, and I believe that there needs to continue to be more spaces for women to share their experiences in life, both within safe spaces of women, within more formalized contexts within the church. I'll get really personal because this is something that I think matters for a lot. It is an experience that unfortunately a lot of women have had. I had 2 miscarriages before I had my son Jack, and that was a moment for me where I wanted to go to the church for this healing, and I didn't. In that moment, I struggled with the Panagia. I was struggling for that connection, I'll be honest. And I thank God that I had a female mentor in my life, multiple women in the church who I could turn to today, who strengthened me in that moment, who then encouraged me to go to the church, who shared, there's a prayer service for women who've experienced this. Can you bring this to your parish priest? I brought it to my parish priest. He had never heard of this service before, and thank God he was willing to do it. But that is a moment there where I see both, wow, thank God for where we've come, right? That I had a female theologian in my corner who I could turn to, who studied motherhood, and I could seek her support. And also, wow, we need to continue to do more so that our church can be the space where women come with those unique experiences that are, particular to being a woman, right? And that's something that I think that I've seen throughout my ministry is that, you know, when there are women who struggle with their place or have these questions about their role in leadership in the church, no one asks those questions or has those frustrations without there being a story behind it, right? A story of either pain or confusion, or they got a really bad answer to a question from someone who didn't really know what they were talking about, right? So I realized that, believe above all else, we have to listen for the story behind the question, right? We have to really create space for that. And that means our church leaders, lay and ordained, to be attentive to kind of the unique experience of women, to create those spaces, to be a safer space, right, for that, to listen to the stories, listen to the suffering, offer compassion in the way that we know Christ would. So I realize that, you know, I kind of bared a lot there, but I think it's important because there are real struggles, and within them there is immense hope through Christ, and through where what our church can do to be a part of the transfiguration of the world.
As far as faith contributing to a better society and how we can inspire women to become future leaders, I know that faith is a powerful force for change. And I know that faith alone, there's like components of it, values and ethics. It really helps us. We learn so much and we put our values into action, and others see that. The community engagement, when we're all involved and people, you know, that's what Philanthropist does. We help the needy. We have women across the country are all working toward the same goal in human trafficking. I'm just using them as an example, but we all think alike, and the faith is the basis for that. We're empowered and we're resilient to keep going. And I think if we role model that for others, other women would want to be leaders as well. And just kind of on a personal note, we know that the evil one is out there. And the evil one talks to us, and I'll speak for myself, talks to me in you can't do that. Why you can't do that? And we need to really uplift one another and uphold one another. I'll never forget being asked to be on the Metropolis board, and I accepted. Well, first of all, they said, we would like you to be on the board. I'm like, turned around, like, they're not talking to me, are they? You know, like, honestly, and that is the evil one speaking to me. And then a fellow sister saying to me, not my literal sister, you can't do that. You're too busy. You've got family in California. You cannot do that. How are you going to do that? Well, you know what? I did it. And I was empowered, and it wasn't my own power. It was my faith that got me through. And I realized we have to uplift one another with that. So really, faith has been there all along. And what I tell others, if they're someone to be on our personal board or whatever, if there's a little voice speaking in you, you can do it. You can do it. It's the Holy Spirit is going to help you and give you the words to speak, like me speaking today on this panel. It's not just me alone. I'm not doing this alone. I'm inspired. Are there barriers still holding people back? Yeah, there are barriers. We have to figure out a way to integrate. We've been working at it for a long time, to integrate being a mother with being a professional and holding them together and allowing it to work, because it is difficult. Do I have a lot of free time now? Yes, I do. But when I had young children, I didn't. So I do have time now to volunteer a lot more than I did before, but we want to make it where we can do it. We can have it all, because I know we can do it all. Anyway, as far as leadership, I know that we can inspire others to do it. And the next step is to just encourage and tap someone and just say that they're not alone in being a leader, because we are never alone. And anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mrs. George. Could we have Mrs. Allen?
I'd like to focus my comments on the barriers that women face and how we can help them overcome them, particularly in the church. So, you know, as we've said earlier, it's clear that women do inspire other women. But for me, it has always been the men that have been the supporters and the mentors. And it is exactly that focus on inclusiveness that we need to really focus on in the church. Whether you're a man, you're a woman, you're a Greek, you're non-Greek, you hear so much about mixed marriages. Inclusivity is hard work, but it's necessary. And I really believe that that's where our focus needs to be. Women need to have the opportunity to lead. They should be parish council presidents. They should be obviously involved in leadership roles in Philoptochos. Not hard, it's a women's organization. But there are other ministries where it's not so prevalent. And if they're not given that opportunity in a respectful way, if our youth are not involved in our parish councils, if our youth and our women are not aspiring to become the next generation of archdiocesan council leaders, to serve, in executive committee roles, we will not glean their power. Because as I said before, they come with a different voice and a different perspective for all the wonderful reasons that the panelists have talked about today. And I've been blessed to serve both His Eminence Archbishop Dimitrios and later His Eminence Archbishop Opidoforos. And I will tell you that His Eminence Archbishop Opidoforos truly believes in the power of women in the church. He knows that they're the army that gets all the work done, but he values them for their selflessness, for their commitment, for their humility, and for their voices. For me, I just believe that we need to be very conscious of how women are included in all of our activities, that we all on this panel have to be the voices that say, wait a minute, include this young person on this committee, include this woman on this committee or in this endeavor or in this ministry, because we're the ones that will get this done for our daughters and our granddaughters and the future.
Thank you. Thank you. President Mary Christie.
Thank you. And thank you all. I'm honored and humbled to be in your presence. Really, I know some of you personally, others I know through their marriage, and some have now met me through my marriage. So I appreciate all of the input today. I wanted to talk a little bit about obstacles. So I have a motto that I live by. The motto that I live by is, the only obstacles in life are the obstacles we create. So to those listening and to the panelists, I would suggest how we view an obstacle, and we're change makers, and there were pioneers before us who were change makers. Instead of seeing it as an obstacle, to see it, how can we solve this perceived problem? And that's sort of how I've encountered what I would perceive, or the secular world perceive as an obstacle. It's how I've encountered my life. So most of you who know me personally know that at 21, my fiance passed away. It was a very difficult experience for me. And I clung to my priest and to my very, very, very best friend, Paul Christie, who was at the seminary. At 23, my mother was diagnosed with a benign brain tumor, but still a brain tumor, meningioma, which after the surgery left her with the effects of a stroke. So caregiving has been a part of my life from a very young age. Elaine, I did not know this. We have something similar in common. I, like you, after having one child, and I had had a miscarriage on both ends, and Kira, thankfully, the prayers were read over me. So I did have a cognizant priest that was aware of that. But after having a healthy born child on their due date, our beautiful daughter Danielle, we had twins very premature, and they were born at 30 and a half weeks, Vasilios and Gabriella. And Vasilios is the one who at 14 months was diagnosed with cerebral palsy, very moderate to, I would say mild. But again, I cried. I have to admit, I cried. There were tears. I was scared. I prayed fervently for about 3 hours, to be honest. I cried and prayed for 3 hours. And then I just got my bootstraps on and said, okay, how are we going to solve this issue? And how can I help my son? And so, and I was alone, because of course my husband had already been transferred. So I was alone. I didn't want to tell him over the phone. So those in similar situations know that it's the strength of the Panagia and the strength. And I want to say in that instance too, and I've continued that to this day, I surround myself with like-minded people who have faith at their core, who believe in the church at their core, and who are women who are truly decision makers. That I am a reference point for guidance. It is true. When you are the presbyter in the church, it is true. People will approach you. Some, and I think people have made points on this, some may not feel comfortable talking about a personal, private, woman, female issue with the priest. Discernment is where our role has to come in. So we have to discern from that conversation and then ask that question, may I share this with my husband? Are you seeking counsel from your spiritual father? Those are the types of things that as women leaders in the church, and we are all that, whether you're married to the priest or not, we are all that. Be available to the young women in the church, to your peers, support them, lift them up. Because I think my understanding from those who know me is that perhaps through that witness of how I handled that situation of the diagnosis of my son and how we never treated him differently. So I treat people with respect and love. I come from love first. That's how I say, okay, first we love. Christ showed us how to love unconditionally, inclusively, not exclusively, inclusively. And then how do we then share that in our witness to other? We serve. So we serve through time, talent, and treasure in love. And if we come with that perspective, I don't think we can go wrong. So in closing, what I wanted to just share is embrace one another, uphold one another, and love one another. And you will be absolutely fine. And what seems to be insurmountable is not. Everything can be accomplished through our faith. Period.
Thank you. That was wonderful. I want to extend a big thank you to all of the panelists for sharing all of your personal experiences, your insights, your advices. As you all have said, and Dr. Perdomo really touched upon, it is one life. We cannot repeat it. And any advice from you to every other woman is truly inspirational, and I hope it helps. So thank you again. Thank you for everyone who's watching this panel, and thank you to the OCN and the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese. It has truly been an honor to do this panel with you, and I wish you all well on the International Day of Women.